Welcome to the Silicon Slopes Conversations. This week we're joined by Derek White, who is the CEO of Galileo. How are you?
I'm great to see you, Garrett. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Thank you for taking the time. We're going to try to cover a lot here, and there is a lot to cover because you've had an amazing career. But let's start with the background. Give us your background of how you landed here on stage as the CEO of Galileo.
Wow. So background is I'm a Utah boy, 7th generation Utahn, born and raised. Lived all over the United States, though, as a kid. And it all started when I started my first little company when I was about 11. My dad worked for me when I was about 12, when he lost his job at the Y. And handing over your paycheck to your dad the first time as the only income as a family was my first real interaction with money. And that little did I know that the impact of money would lead me into a career of banking and technology and all of that. And so started a business as a kid, then was just fascinated with how, with different businesses, started another one when we were in college, a sports and entertainment business. I love sports and entertainment and marketing, and so started this little business up at Utah State University, and one of our clients happened to be a financial services company. And they wanted people to distribute financial services product. It was the heyday of what were considered co-branded marketing for co-branded credit cards back in the day, and that was a new thing. And so Utah State University had credit cards, and they wanted somebody to distribute it. So started doing that, and then got hired and moved back east. And got into how technology changed financial services. The first day that fintech was born, the term wasn't fintech at the time, but the first time financial services as an industry went onto this thing that was called the internet was July 6th, 1996. And we can talk about that story later. But that was the birth of what would be considered fintech. And then that rolled into creating the first internet bank, second internet bank. We sold an internet bank to a big British company that's called Barclays. Any of you who follow soccer may remember when Barclays sponsored the British Premier League. That took us overseas. I told my wife it'd be 6 months after we just finished business school. Had 2 kids. One of my sons is here today. He was 4 at the time when we moved across the seas, and we then, 6 months, turned into 14 years overseas. And he was raised entirely overseas other than his last senior year of high school. And so little Utah boy had the opportunity to go live overseas 14 years, working for some of the biggest banks in the world. After creating the first couple of internet banks, then created the first mobile money service, think Venmo, about 10 years ago in the United Kingdom. Created the first fintech accelerator. Worked with some of the world's leaders like Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, in building the London brand and the United Kingdom brand. And just met some amazing people, had amazing experiences, raised our kids overseas and in Utah. And it's been incredible.
Very cool. A lot there, obviously, and for imbeciles kind of like me. An internet bank versus a normal bank. What is that? What is the differentiation?
Biggest differentiation is there's no physical brick and mortar. Everything you ever want to be able to do, you do on this or on your desktop. And that's the difference. You don't have to physically walk into a bank branch, and you still have to today for many banks. You have to walk into a bank to open an account, whether it's a small business checking account, a small business savings account. You want to get a credit card or a loan or a mortgage or whatever it is. The internet changed that. Then the mobile phone changed it. Now AI is going to change it, and we can talk about AI if you want a little bit later. But all of these are just waves of technology, and what you learn and recognize over time through all these experiences is that it's all about how technology changes business models and how technology has changed banking. The first wave was internet banking. And to keep it really simple, it was simply you take the very first fintech thing was taking a web form application of a credit card, a piece of paper, and put it on the internet for the first time July 6, 1996. A little interstitial banner, you click on it twice on AOL, a web form appears, and we did 60,000 accounts in the first day. We didn't know how big this internet thing was. When we did 60,000 accounts in a day, now hold on just a second here, because this was a web form that appeared to the customer, interstitial banner, enter 24 fields of information into the internet, then goes off to AOL, and supposedly your credit card's supposed to come to you in the mail. Little did people know that was just a web form, but in the back office, that web form was printed off, rekeyed into the actual system of record. So the separation of the front end from the back end. And so those of you that are in technology will understand the impact of having a separated system. But July 6, 1996 was when it really started. And then internet banking is really just the ability to do any interaction that you used to have to talk to a human to do, or had to fill out a piece of paper to do, you can do on the internet.
Bankers traditionally and stereotypically don't like change. They're a little bit stodgy. So it sounds like there's a lot of rocking of the ships. What was your role in, like, hey, let's do this, whether it was first internet bank or mobile money? How hard was the pushback?
Let's just say it's healthy. Yeah, you work in I've had the privilege of working in three $50 billion market cap financial institutions, one a big U.S. institution, one a big British institution, and one a big Spanish institution. And the cultures are notably different based on the language of the company, the language of the geography, and just the company itself. One of those institutions was 320 years old. One of them was 160 years old. Another one was about 100 years old. And so the culture of how business has been built and how business has been run, legacy, history, and the way that the organizations are run, the way decisions are made, the way investments are made, the way people interact are all very, very different. So when you introduce change, and especially when you're brought in as the catalyst to drive that change. I'll give you one example. I was brought into a Spanish organization called BBVA. It's a 180-year-old financial institution, has 30,000 physical branches around the world. 6,000 physical branches around the world, 30,000 ATMs around the world, operates in 35 countries, and has 140,000 employees. And I was brought in as the catalyst. The guy that ran the bank, Francisco Gonzalez, was viewed as the #1 banker in the world, voted by all of his chairmen and CEOs around the world. And he described it as, I got a lot of bankers, Derek. I got a lot of people that know how to make money doing banking. But the way banking is run today is not the way banking will be run in the future. I need somebody that can help create the future and translate this disparity, this delta, this gap between vision and execution in reality. So there was resistance, but each organization was very different. This organization, BBVA, you couldn't move fast enough because the chairman and the CEO wanted it. And he just said, go and do. And I was in a position on the leadership team of the company and responsible for creating the future of a $30 billion revenue line. And so when you can take and pivot the human capital, the physical, the financial capital of a $30 billion revenue line, that's a lot to be able to invest in change. At other points in the career, though, being the catalyst for change, whether it was creating the first fintech accelerator or the first mobile money solution, I'll never forget when we were designing the mobile money solution in the United Kingdom 9 years ago. See, in the United Kingdom, they have something called faster payments, rails, that moves money back and forth immediately. So I can, on my mobile app, I can send money and it shows up in an account and it'll ding, and it'll actually tell me my money's arrived. It's not like here in the United States, there's the ACH rails that actually move money back and forth. It can take anywhere between 1 to 3 days that you have to wait for money. It's not real time. So when we were designing, we came up with this concept and we recognized that there were still these paper checks that were floating around in the economy. It cost the bank 83 cents to process one physical check, and there were tens of millions of physical checks being distributed. And so we said, couldn't we just replace that with the mobile phone? Yes, okay, but the fraud team didn't like the potential risk because a physical handing over from a human with a piece of paper in the historical model made sense. How do you manage fraud and risk in an environment where there isn't that other human? There's no banker taking a physical piece of paper. How do you replicate that? And I'll never forget a discussion on the line where we're saying, okay, we're just going to simply use the mobile phone number as a proxy for their bank account. Wait a minute. Fraud team's like, well, you're going to use a proxy for the bank account? And anyway, I could go into that in detail, but there are times when there is resistance, but when you see what the future is going to be, then it's more about getting everybody bought into that vision and connecting the dots and bringing people together to see the common future. And then as you bring the people together, bring everyone together with a common view of the future, then magic happens. And it's amazing.
Yeah. A lot to unwind there, but there's also human psychology involved in that one. Obviously, the fraud team was like, no, and the CO is yes, and you're kind of in the middle there. You've put a lot of time and effort into this industry. How much does the human element, the human psychology, because it is interaction with technology and money. It used to just be interaction with a banker. Now it's interaction with technology and money from a human perspective.
Okay, there might be like 3 or 4 stories in this one. I spent a bit of time at Google, and Google talks about how they have 12 ecosystems. And they define an ecosystem of having 1 billion users. And so they're kind of an ecosystem of ecosystems. Those of you that know Square and follow Square will also know that Square refers to them as an ecosystem of ecosystems. What is this concept that is ecosystem? It's not a biological ecosystem. It's a human interaction ecosystem in a digital environment. And so Google defines these ecosystems of humans interacting in their technology, but then what's the way of monetizing human interactions? And as I invest as an angel across different businesses, and as we look at creating the future of our business that I run today, and as I work with other industries outside of just banking, there are ingredients or variables that tie across everything. And invariably, everything, every business model, every stress in human life, every interaction and relationship that we have ultimately comes back to human behavior. And human behavior and human decisions. Think about the business that you run, whatever industry you're in, and how that business makes money. In order for that business to make money, or monetization, it's probably monetization of some human interaction. And that monetization of a human interaction comes back to a human making a decision, which gets back to your point on behavioral economics. Humans, we learn through the study of behavioral economics. If you haven't studied behavioral economics, there's a couple of great books, and we could talk about and writings and papers on understanding that humans fundamentally, the majority of humans, do not like making decisions. We don't. So when you have to make a big decision, who's your go-to? Is Google your go-to? Is another human your go-to? Is it your girlfriend? Is it your mom? Who is your go-to when you have to make a decision? Because making decisions is how companies ultimately make money. And it used to be, I'd come into your office, Garrett, and I'd say, I want to buy a product from you, or I want to get a loan from you, or I want some advice from you, and you'd hand me a piece of paper. You'd hand me one of those things right there, and I would say, let's do this, Garrett, and then I'd sign a big DW at the bottom. And that's how you made money. You didn't make money until there was a signature on the bottom of that piece of paper. Before you could get me to put my signature on that piece of paper, there was a human behavioral element where behaviorally, psychologically, and you really get into the psychology of the brain and human decisions here, is by you being there, just the fact that Garrett is there representing somebody that I potentially trust, whether I've known you for 3 minutes and we've done this loan thing or I'm buying a product from you, I psychologically am displacing some of my stress onto you just because you're physically there. So the advent of technology changed the fact that there isn't as much human interaction. And there's no better example of this than driving 5 teenage boys an hour and a half to a lacrosse tournament and see how much they used to talk versus when I would sit with that guy back there, Curtis Cox. We'd sit on the bus together to a basketball game, and all we did was talk. Hour and a half, these boys are on their phones. Right? Human interaction has fundamentally changed. The way humans make decisions has fundamentally changed. The monetization of human interactions has fundamentally changed because technology has changed. And as technology changes and those variables change, therefore the creation of the future of any industry, whether it's fintech, whether it's social media, whether it's software, whether it's security, whatever it might be, all of those variables change because it ultimately comes back to humans, human trust, but ultimately for industry, for business, is about monetization of human decisions and how do humans make decisions. When we were designing the first websites and first mobile applications, it was how many fields are there on there? You know, anybody that works in marketing and funnel management and marketing will tell you, you want to minimize the number of decisions, and choice can kill decisions. So minimizing the number of taps. When we took a loan application and put it in the mobile app for the very first time that you can get a personal loan on a mobile app, the team came back with a design and they had, 17 fields in it. When we took it from 17 to 7 fields and it's tap, 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 increased response rate by 70%. Because it's less things that you have to think about. How do you remove the think? How do you remove the decisions? That's what AI is going to do. It's going to remove the decisions. Anyway, that was a lot there.
No, I love it. Just for funsies, you have to make a lot of decisions in your life.
Yeah.
You've made a lot. And who do you go to when you need a little bit of help with certain decisions?
I've been very fortunate to have some really, really great mentors that have helped me. Obviously, I've been blessed with a woman that loves me, that is my wife, and she is my go-to. At times, she taps out on all this industry crap, and she doesn't want to talk work stuff. So I have her for go-to, for family, for advice, for me. And then I have mentors for different parts of my life. Stu Friedman, a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, has given he's written a great book on leadership. And he talks about the 4 aspects of leadership. And that's your personal, your community, your business, and then there's a 4th one I can't remember right now. And most leadership, a lot of leadership is looking at different parts of that. And his argument is, why can't you bring it all together? And the argument is that you don't have to break up leadership into different parts of your life. That you should be a leader in your home, with your family. You should be a leader at work. You should be a leader in the community. But you don't have to separate those, and you don't have to make trade-offs. And I'm a believer of that. But I'll give you an example of a go-to person that has been a go-to person for me in my life. And remarkably, for me, 3 of these people are incredibly wonderful women. There's a woman by the name of Jocelyn Sutton, and I wasn't planning to tell this story, so Joss, if you see this, I apologize. But Jocelyn Sutton was my first boss's boss. And you know, in our culture here in Utah, we're taught the OIM, open your mouth. If you want to do something, if you want to share your vision of where you want to go, and we can talk about this a little bit later, but you share it with those you trust, what you'd like to do with your life, what your vision is, what your challenges are. I shared with Jocelyn the thought that I really wanted to get into international business. I'm this little Utah farm boy. I'm working at the fastest growing financial stock in the world. We had 92% compounded annual growth rate in our share price and riding a rocket of a company. And that was really cool and fascinating. But I said to Joss, I said, we're starting a new international division. There's 2 people in that division. I'd like to go work in that division. What does Joss do? Joss picks up the phone while I'm across the desk from her. She calls the president of the division and says, I've got a kid you've got to hire. I'm 4 years into my career. And she says, you've got to hire this guy. Jocelyn opened a door that I didn't even know existed. There's like a mental barrier that international business division was something that somebody else does in the movies, and you see somebody else do that. I'm a kid from Ephraim, Utah. Growing up, my father worked at Snow College. My mother was an educator. They had no desire to make money. They wanted to help change the world and educate people. I simply said to a friend, a mentor, that opened a door that I didn't even know I could get through. And within 30 seconds, the door was opened. Within 2 weeks, I was the 4th hire into an international division of a expanding financial technology company. It was amazing. And I've had other people that have done that for me. And so I'm at the point in my career that I've lit up ecosystems in Cape Town, in Israel, in London, in Singapore, all over the world. But I've always connected back to my roots in Utah. And we moved back to Utah 4 years ago because we want to give back to Utah. And we want to keep Utah. And we want to scale it. But my go-to people have been very close mentors that I have trusted over time. But if I can, Garrett, it's important to have mentors and people that you trust. But it's also so important, and every leadership guru will talk about this. You'll talk about it in your company. You'll talk it in whatever social circles you may be in at some point in your life. Figuring out who you are is the most important thing. A mentor can only help you to the extent you understand who you are. And I've had a couple of principles that didn't start out from the time I was in Turkeytown, Utah, Ephraim, Utah, but was honed and refined through experiences overseas. And those principles have become who I am, and you can ask my son, he'll know what these principles are, as to what our family is grounded in. And they come from 3 languages that I happen to speak in varying levels of fluency. And the first one is in English, it's reciprocity. There's a great book about, are you a giver or are you a taker? And you'll think about the relationships that you have with people, and there's some people that just give and give and give, and that's what you are. You're a giver. Clint's a giver. John's a giver. That's why I love these Silicon Slopes guys. They just give to the ecosystem. But there's some people that are more takers. And one of the 3 principles that I personally operate off of is a principle of reciprocity. Because I'm a giver, and I will give, and I will open up, and I trust people. And my biggest strength is I trust people, and my biggest failure is I trust people. And I'll take that. But reciprocity is about, if you open up, then magical things can happen. And you'll get a reciprocal relationship, and we can get into that. The second is, I happened to spend 2 years in Norway when I was 19. And the language there's a word called ekta. And if there's one principle our family operates off of, it's ekta. And ekta doesn't fully translate, but it translates as close to authentic and genuine and real. And the more you can get to who genuinely you are, living your truth, as a lot of people say today, the more you are true to who you are, and I talk to my son about this, I talk to my daughter about this, they're totally different people. And that's okay. I learned this most profoundly when I was in London, and I was working very closely with the two consecutive CEOs of what would be Barclays, the big bank. Because I always thought that there was a perfect recipe to be a leader or a CEO, but there isn't. Everybody's different. And that's what's magical and important. But Bob Diamond is an extreme extrovert. Bob Diamond's the guy from Barclays that came in, and after the financial crisis, he bought Lehman Brothers. Let me talk to you about a classic meeting with Bob Diamond. As you'd go into a meeting with Bob Diamond, Bob would say, wait, hold on. No, he's running a company with 140,000 people, 25 billion pound revenue line, a very extensive business, retail banking, investment banking across every industry, super smart guy. But Bob Diamond, you'd send him papers ahead of time, he wouldn't look at them. He didn't like to read. Bob's famous line was, no, hold on. Talk to me like I'm a 5-year-old. When you start talking to what you thought was language for a 5-year-old, Bob would sit up in his chair and say, okay, I'm sorry. He didn't make you feel uncomfortable. He said, I'm sorry, I'm not getting it. Will you talk to me like I'm a 2-year-old? That's Bob Diamond. Immediately following Bob Diamond, the CEO that took over from Bob Diamond was this guy by the name of Anthony Jenkins. Anthony's the guy that we worked with. We created this Ping It Venmo equivalent mobile money service of the United Kingdom. Anthony's the new CEO. Anthony couldn't been more polar opposite. Anthony liked his papers 3 days in advance. He read the papers. He knew the papers. He had notes on the documents. Bob's an extrovert. Anthony's an introvert. Anthony likes his papers in advance. Anthony comes into the meeting, says, I have 3 things I want to cover in this meeting. You had 3 things covered in the meeting. An hour scheduled meeting could be a 7-minute meeting. If he got the 3 things out of the meeting, that's all he needed. Super hyper efficient. Both incredibly successful CEOs of mega corporations, entirely different. And as I talk to youth all over the world, if there's one thing that I could get to youth to understand, anyone in their career, is to recognize that every single one of us has a magic. And the more acta you are with who you are, it doesn't matter that Joe is smarter than you, Sally is faster than you. It's being true to who you are and finding your place. Because once you do that, then mentors can open doors for you. So I'm sorry, I'm telling lots of stories here. Reciprocity, ecta. And then the last one is, I already kind of hinted at it, is live your truth, la verdad. In Spanish, verdad. The more you are true to who you actually are, the more rich and reciprocal your relationships will be. And I've found that as I've strived to be as true and authentic to the person that I am, then mentors and others have helped open doors for me over time.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. A lot of great things there. There's more than one ways to skin the cat, and I'd love to work with the CEO Diamond and explain things like to a 5-year-old. But both work. And which one did you have the best rapport with?
I had the best rapport with a guy by the name of Carlos Torres Vila, who's the CEO of BBVA. I had great rapport with all of them. But they're different relationships at different times in your career and different positions in the company. But I'll never forget the fact I get a call from the #1 banker in the world, and he says, I want you to come to a Spanish bank and live in Madrid, Spain. We're living in London at the time. And and I said, Francisco, you've got 140,000 employees. I don't speak Spanish. And he said, I don't care. He said, we're a global company, and we're an international company. But for me, the magic is coming back to my acta as to who I am and what I do is I go back to when I was in third grade, living in Orem, Utah, going to Bonneville Elementary School. My brother's an introvert. He's a year older than I am. He's perfect. He is perfect. Everybody thinks and thought he was perfect. So I was like, I'm not like him. I'm so different. I wanted to play football and basketball in my front yard. And I would say to my perfect brother, I'd say, hey, Courtney, why don't we get everybody together and play some basketball or football? He's like, nah, I don't want to do that. If you call everybody, I'll play. And so I would call everybody, because you had to call everybody back then. I would call everybody on our street, and I would say, game on, 5 minutes, my place, front lawn. My brother would show up, and he was perfect, and he dominated. But I connect people, and that's what I like to do. I like to create. I like to build. I like to translate ideas into execution, and I'm pretty good at that. And the reason I connected with Carlos was because he wasn't that. He needed that, and he saw the value of what we could do. And it was magical. I sat down in my first interview with him. It wasn't even an interview. It turned into us taking a sheet of paper and him literally drawing what he wanted. And I said, this is what I'm going to do next. And it was identical. And it was magical. And it was a magical relationship. We have a great relationship even today as a result of that.
It's always nice when that happens. The stars line up. We've talked a little bit about it. Ecosystems. Financial, technical, and human capital are obviously a part of that. You've insinuated you love connecting people, you love building. Ecosystems are pretty big things to build. Talk about ecosystems in general, and if you'd like your vision and thoughts on the Utah ecosystem.
Yeah, so we can talk, let's not talk about digital ecosystems for a minute. If we can, let's talk about the Utah ecosystem. So the Utah GDP is somewhere between 150 billion to 200 billion a year. The London London as a city GDP is about 5 times that of the Utah GDP. And then the UK's a bit bigger than that. So the Utah ecosystem, number one state and number one economy for 10 plus years. It's magical. When I graduated from college versus when my sons graduated from college, 2 entirely different ecosystems, 2 entirely different work environments. When I graduated, I had 2 job opportunities. One to go be a regional manager of a Pizza Hut, or to go run Jones Paint and Glass as potential opportunities. The opportunities in this ecosystem now are far beyond what I had at the time. Having moved and lived overseas and operated in ecosystems and markets, let's talk markets and then we can talk digital ecosystems in a minute. There are 4 key ingredients for ecosystems that are absolutely essential, and you go back to London as an example here. After the financial crisis in London, there were 0 companies in the IPO pipeline in Europe, in all of Europe. Not London, not Germany, in all of Europe. For a year after the financial crisis, there were 0 companies in the IPO pipeline. And you may not believe this or not, but there's a huge amount of parallels between Utah and London or the UK from an ecosystem standpoint. So London, this place that has been part of the British Empire, and for thousands of years the British Empire had extensive presence around the world. But in London, there was this kind of inferiority complex as to innovations happening everywhere else, but not here. Why? Why is this? And so there's a number of us got together, about 6 or 8 of us got together within London and started connecting people. And fast forward, if I had time, I'd tell you the full story of how we did it, but of what happened. But they created something that was called Silicon Roundabouts, a physical space, and a number of other things that came into play. But there are 4 key things that were identified as needed. Financial capital, human capital, technical capital are all really, really, really important. But there was a guy that was, Steve Case was one of the founders of America Online. He and the Kauffman Foundation did a study of ecosystems around the world and what makes ecosystems successful and thrive, survive, and those are 3 of the ingredients: human capital, financial capital, and technical capital, or technical capital meaning innovation, technology innovation. But the most powerful influencer on ecosystems, market ecosystems, millions of people coming together to create ecosystem, is connectivity. And the culture and the ethos of the humans in that ecosystem wanting to pay it forward and not keep it for themselves. And there is a study to be able to actually identify, and the Kauffman Foundation, the Case Foundation, have identified that and documented that. So that's a study of ecosystems, of ingredients of what's successful here in the Utah ecosystem, the Silicon Slopes ecosystem. What you all are doing here is invaluable for the future of our state, for our children, for all of us. And so I couldn't give you guys enough hugs and give you enough love. I love what you're doing because it will bring, I think it was 5-10 years ago, there were like less than 10 venture capital firms here. Now there's 60 plus. Financial capital's flowing. That's not a problem in Utah anymore, thanks to the successful exits of a lot of people. Human capital isn't a problem. COVID opened up human capital here. It's a challenge because now Utah's been discovered and our people can live here and work elsewhere. But technology, we've got great technology. The magical ingredient that this ecosystem has, that I would argue is culturally embedded into the people beyond other ecosystems, is connectivity. And that's why we've got such a exciting future. So that's markets and human ecosystems. You want to talk digital ecosystems, that's another kind of play.
Let's hit on that real quick.
Again, that comes back to the kind of Google play. It's about creating an ecosystem and not just creating a great little business that you can scale to a couple $100 million and have a successful exit and make a lot of money, but to create a true ecosystem business, it starts with those ingredients that are common and similar, whether starting a business or trying to transform a 300,000 person organization. The variables and the ingredients are the same. It's humans. How many humans do you have? What types of humans do you have? What languages do those humans have? What is the culture of those humans? And when I mean humans, I'm talking about customers, I'm talking users, I'm talking buyers of your products, but it's also about your clients. It's about your colleagues. It's about customers, it's about colleagues, and how do those colleagues actually interface with your customers? So it's about humans. Caesar Samgupta at Google ran the next billion users. How many businesses do you know out there have somebody running the next billion users? And that's their job. One of the most senior people in the company. Ecosystems is about getting billions of humans, driving billions or trillions of interactions. And those interactions can be digitally, they can be across multi-channel, omni-channel, whatever it might be. But then it's looking at how are those monetized. And I'll give you an example. One of the 12 businesses, many of you won't know this, but any of you that have been in banking will know that there was the threat of big tech was going to take over banking. Look at what Apple's doing right now. Apple's doing an incredible job of moving into the banking space if you haven't followed it. But there's been a threat for like 7+ years of big tech taking over banking. So Google is on their 4th, 5th attempt at Google Pay and Google Payments. Payments is one of their ecosystems with over 1 billion users. So but payments within Google isn't run as a business unit. Payments is run with an aspiration of having more humans spending more time and more interactions in their ecosystem that are monetized through ads. Monetization doesn't happen through the actual payments. They don't want to make money off of the payments. They make money off of monetization through ads. So the creation of an ecosystem is billions of humans looking at how they're interacting and then how that monetization happens. That's how you create ecosystem businesses. And there's an equation associated with that. Similarly, anybody running a multi-billion-dollar legacy institution can take those same principles and you can dissect. So any major bank, I sit with CEO and chairmen of major banks around the world. You can take the top 5 bank here in the United States, the chairman and CEO running a top 5 bank here in the United States will sit there and he'll look at his P&L and he'll say, I've got maybe 4 big business lines, but he'll break that down to 50 P&Ls, 53 P&Ls as one example. He'll have 53 P&Ls, and each of those are an individual product, and banking was built off of products, not off of humans per se. And the architecture of how that works is built off of products. So CEOs and chairmen will look at their business and they'll say, you got 53 P&Ls here. What's the future of each of these P&Ls, and how do I run that business? Well, they'll be looking at out of those 53 businesses, how many will survive a decade from now, 3 years from now, a year from now? I've got 50 that will survive, or do I have 3? And depending on where that business is, and we've recently seen some of the biggest failures in banking, in the history of banking in the United States, 3 of the biggest failures have been within the last 2 months. And that's because they have not transformed and or managed their book of business in line with where the future's heading.
Speaking of where the future's headed, by the way, we're going to open it up for questions to the audience, from the audience here in a minute. Last time we were hanging out was February, and we were talking mostly about elk hunting. If memory serves, since then, AI has existed for quite some time in the vernacular and in application. Now it's really here in various forms or another. Using your crystal ball, which I'm assuming you guys are all doing, how is that going to impact your business and then kind of these ecosystems and fintech in general?
Yeah, so AI, ChatGPT, there's two examples I'll give here. One's the automotive industry, an industry that I've had the privilege of working closely with because as a banker, you get to meet with lots of every industry. Like big companies like BMW and Mercedes have to borrow money from banks. And so in order to lend them money, you have to understand their business model, and then you have to decide, do you give them how much money you give them. And so I'll talk about the automotive industry, but I want to give just another example. If you want to see where AI is heading for kind of chat or human interactions, just do an experiment on your drive home. Any of you use Siri in your vehicle when you're driving and send a text by voice? Maybe you just push the button. Yeah, I've got a couple people say, Siri, send Jenny a text. And then just talk into the text. Talk into the text like you're really talking to Jenny. And then listen to Siri read it back to you. And it's choppy. It's literally, it's very transactional, it's very choppy. It's a computer speaking back to you, saying back to you the text that you've just given them, right? That's where we are today. It's not warm, it's not human, it's not like the movie Her, if any of you have seen the movie Her, and how warm and human that feels. The emotional side of it, the connectivity of it. You know, I did that today on the drive down here, sending myself to kind of reminders. And when Siri was reading it back to me, I wanted Siri to say, I send text to myself as reminders, and I want Siri to say, Derek, you realize you're sending yourself this text, right? There's no real context behind it. AI will bring that. ChatGPT does that on words and on text. They don't do it on numbers. So just understand, ChatGPT does it on text and on language. It doesn't do it on numbers. But that will happen. That will open up. The real changing part of AI, it's advancing and it will remove decisions out of our lives that we don't like to make, and so that will be helpful. It will create entirely new job categories that people haven't even considered yet. There's already a business is being built off of ChatGPT. The first financial services, we have a financial services chatbot that sits on top of it now, and there's 2 others that have been built and released just over the last couple of months. But I want to talk automotive industry as an example. Okay, so all of you have talked to, everybody knows about Tesla and the potential hands-free driving, right? You may or may not know that in the automotive industry, there are 5 levels of autonomy defined largely by the industry. Those 5 levels of technology can be defined by 3 types of human behavior. Those 3 types of human behavior are your feet on, your hands on, and your mind on. And the automotive industry is somewhere around the level 2, level 3 of their evolution from level 1 to level 5 of this autonomy. And I was listening to a podcast just the other day saying that, you know, we're still years away from level 4, level 5 autonomy. Level 5 autonomy is when you're sitting back, Garrett, on the way to the farm in Nebraska, and you're totally chill, and the vehicle's taking you, you don't have to think about it. You're entertained along the way. Somebody else or something else is driving you. That's the level, full 5-level autonomy. We're not there yet. But if you've ever been level 3 autonomy, going down the Autobahn at 190 miles an hour for 45 minutes in a full level 3 vehicle, your feet are off, your hands are off, but your mind isn't off. And after 45 minutes at 190 miles an hour on the Autobahn, your mind is shattered. Because at 190 miles an hour, you're going to want to grab that wheel if something happens. So autonomy will get us to a point, and AI will get us to a point where you build trust increasingly with machines, like I build trust with Gareth the human. It will remove that transactional, choppy text experience that you have back and forth with Siri, that will record and capture the actual text, the recognition of the text, the recognition of visuals like Google Photos and Apple can recognize the visual, but the true intelligence associated with it and the emotional intelligence associated with it, that will come over time.
Interesting. It is a little bit funny how history repeats itself, because as America was getting ready to land on the moon through Mercury and Gemini, the best of the pilots who were really good at physics and math and all of that, they were really irritated that there was no wings on these things, right? And they hated that for the most part, even 50 years ago, they didn't have a lot of control. And they would argue back and forth with the engineers, like, we're supposed to fly this. I'm like, no, it's going to do most of it for you. So that, who knows how long that'll take to get out of our psyche of like, I'm going to take this thing back over. But it would be nice to just sit in the back seat on the trip to Nebraska and sleep. So I wouldn't be too opposed to it.
That day's coming.
Yeah. All right, let's open it up to questions from the audience. We've got a mic in the back. Wait till it gets to you right here.
A little while ago, you said, keep Utah, Utah, and scale it. And I would love to hear more about that.
Studying ecosystems and ecosystems around the world, one of the most valuable things, and I think our governors have done a great job of doing this, is creating incentives to keep headquarters in Utah. We've had our tech ecosystem is fantastic, and there's great startups that have been scaled up, and I have some great friends that have had some incredible exits, and there's a flow of financial capital. And if you study Silicon Valley, there are a couple of mafias that come out of it. There's the original mafia, then there's the PayPal mafia, and then there's a couple of others. And those mafias are created largely off of liquidation events that create financial capital that flows financial capital into the ecosystem. Because when you make a couple $1 billion, you can flow money back into the ecosystem. And Ryan can decide whether he wants to spend his billions of dollars on a Utah Jazz, or if he wants to spend his money on a DC hockey team. But people like Ryan and others are doing a great job of investing financial capital back into Utah. But one of the things and the reason I took over Galileo as a company is it's a 20-year-old Utah company that was in 3 countries 2 years ago. Now we're in 17 countries. We had 300 employees. Now we have 2,000 employees. We had 1 product. Now we've got 5 products. And we're doing it from Utah. And my goal, my personal passion for the rest of my life will be to build and to help Utah companies scale to the point where the founders and the company leaders can decide whether they want to exit, and to put them in a position where they're exiting on the terms that they want to exit. And to the extent possible, we can keep headquarters in Utah, and we can keep the culture that is Utah, Utah. I live up in Eden Valley, Ogden Valley up in Eden, and we got a lot of people moving in. And I love people moving in because it creates diversity, it creates opportunities for more connections. But there's something magical about Utah, and there's massive opportunity for Utah, but we got to keep Utah, Utah. Does that answer your question?
Derek, thanks for your time today. It's been really interesting to listen to you. A segue to what you just mentioned about kind of the expansion of Galileo internationally. I want to follow up with that kind of the challenges with scaling in terms of, you talked about behavioral economics and what prohibited that from Galileo doing that previously, and in light of kind of the U.S. is very industry-led, whereas European and Asia-Pacific markets have a lot of government mandates, whether it's PSD2 or open banking, now sustainability. How do you view that expansion, and where will you go with Galileo going forward internationally?
So Galileo was built by Clay Wilkes, absolutely brilliant serial entrepreneur, payments guru. And Clay built a business that he was very comfortable running, that he knew. And then Clay called me and says, Derek, I want to hand over Galileo, and I want to keep Galileo a Utah company. Any way you'll leave Google and come run it? And I said, first couple times I said no, and then I really realized it was an opportunity to take a Utah company and do something special with it. But I've worked in global markets and very comfortable with operating in geographies outside of the United States. That's where a big part of my career was. I understand PSD2. I understand there are markets around the world that do not have 3 credit bureaus that can give you an instant understanding of a consumer's credit position, and let alone having one score, having black and white data versus gray data on a credit score on an individual. Many countries around the world don't have credit bureaus like we do. Many countries around the world don't have a U.S. postal system. Jeff Bezos says the greatest competitive advantage the United States has had is the postal service. You know, it's like trying to get a message to somebody and you can't trust the delivery of it in the old world. So Galileo, as a company, we have 3 primary areas of diversification of our business. One is the types of clients that we serve. If you don't know Galileo, Galileo today has our combined company. We acquired a company as well. I'll just talk about under the Galileo umbrella. We have 200 million users across 17 countries that are interacting with money on our platform. And we allow anybody that in this room that would want to create a Silicon Slopes bank, you come with us. We can help you have a checking account, a savings account, a debit card in the U.S. market within 35 days. You don't have to have a bank license. We'll connect you in our marketplace to connect you to be able to go live with customers. So we need to diversify our customers. We need to diversify our product offering and diversify the geography. That's the strategy we've been on in the last 2 years, and that's where we're moving. And I could elaborate on the business in more detail, but we're really excited about where it's headed.
I've been pretty fascinated with Web3 smart contracts, so much so that I was learning Solidity for about 6 months, and then ChatGPT came out, and I realized it could program Solidity better than I could. Do you know? Have you heard of any companies or any areas where, let's say, banking AI and Web3 smart contracts are like intersecting? And if not, do you know where? Like, what's your projection of when that will happen? Because that's kind of a fascinating area for me. So.
Yeah, that's a big space we can talk about. On the company that I personally know the founders well, and I think is doing amazing things in that space, is Chainalysis. Chainalysis brings Chainalysis has, I think their latest. I met the founders when there were 3 of them. They now have somewhere between $7 and $11 billion valuation, and they joined our accelerator program, and they essentially can help find the bad actors on the blockchain, and they're bringing all of that technology. So whenever you hear about a capture of $100 million, $300 million of crypto, of Bitcoin, or whatever it is, from some bad actor, they're usually the company that sits behind that. I'd encourage you to look at them, and then I'm happy to follow up with you afterwards. There's a number of other players in that space. Cool. And if you want a connection with Jonathan Levine, I'm happy to connect you with him.
Correct me if I'm wrong, you're willing to stick around for a few minutes?
Sure, happy to.
We're not going to get to everyone.
Hey, so also a fellow Bonneville Elementary alumni, so represent. I'm building in the healthcare space, and as far as the kind of regulatory hurdles that exist, it's probably healthcare and banking in terms of the
Yes.
depth of red tape.
Yes.
So when you were building in your verticals, what did you do to, one, identify how to cut through the red tape, and then what was your process to make that happen?
The customer is the great mediator of any internal debates around regulatory compliance. The moment where we were trying to be able to send money from one mobile device to another mobile device and the fraud team was freaking out, we brought it back to the customer. There's an incredible HBR Harvard Business Review article that came out a couple weeks ago, maybe a week ago, that takes and looks at organizations, how strategically aligned they are. And it looks at it and says the most strategically aligned organizations are those that truly bring it back to the customer and use the customer as a great mediator of any challenges. Because whether it's policy, whether it's regulation, or whether it's compliance with the regulation or policy, there are varying levels of interpretation of policy, regulation, and compliance with that. And who interprets that? A human. Comes back to human behavior. And the person sitting across the table that may have a differing view, how do you bring them around to the view of making the right decisions that ultimately will help the customer and the company? I hope that answers your question. If not, I'm happy to follow up with you afterwards. But healthcare is, yes, a very parallel industry and a lot of similarities.
I'm a little bit irritated that this isn't a 5-hour-long Silicon Slopes conversation, because I think a lot of people in the room, including myself, would love to just keep going, but we are limited on time. Thank you so much for the insights you've shared, the stories. I'm a lot more educated. I really appreciate that. And I love that you're transparent and very open. Great quality trait there. Thank you so much, Derek. Appreciate it.
Thank you.